everybody. Thank you for joining us. We just finished another workshop for SSK Foundation about signs and symptoms of different mental health. And we have two very special guest speakers today. I'll have them introduce themselves. We have first Michaeli.
Hi, my name is Michaeli. I'm a senior program manager with Santa Clara County Behavioral Health Services Department. And by clinical background, I'm a licensed nurse family therapist.
And then next we have Mr. Tony Lopez.
And I'm also with Santa Clara County Behavioral Health. I am what is called a law enforcement liaison, basically kind of a liaison between mental health and law enforcement. And my background was law enforcement. I was a police officer for 27 years.
You're also a retired captain, correct?
I'm a retired captain from law enforcement, yes.
Nice. Can you give us a little bit background on what depression is? How do you spot it, and what do you do once you spot it, as a family members or as friends?
Thank you. Depression is a mood disorder when somebody experiences symptoms of, when they experience, when they don't go out and enjoy or do the so-called pleasurable activities, or and that affects their daily functioning, i.e. unable to go to school or work or get up. So it has various symptoms, but it is a mood disorder when people are feeling down, more than just sadness, but they experience, again, it kind of affects their daily functioning. And so when a loved one recognizes that their loved one's having symptoms of depression, you might want to reach out for services. And I mentioned the resources earlier in terms of calling Santa Clara County, and I'll say very slowly and briefly here. The call center, behavioral health call center, is the best number to call to reach out for any questions or starting the referral process. That number is 1-800-704-0900. Again, 1-800-704-0900.
Thank you. And if you live in Alameda County or San Francisco County, you can reach out to SSK Foundation, and we have those information for you as well. And we want to go over a little bit as well. Tony did a graph a very brief graph of a 4 hours program on how to approach as well as have a conversation with somebody that is going through a scenario of a psychosis. Could you go a little bit about that?
And it doesn't have to be a psychosis. It's basically a model for dealing with someone who's in crisis. Generally, it would be a mental health crisis, but it could be an emotional crisis. It could be something else. And it's again, a long presentation, but the short version of it is when someone's in crisis, they need time to process the crisis, and this model gives them time. It allows you to actively listen to what the person is saying, to display maybe a little bit of empathy about what they're going through, to build a little rapport with that person, all with the goal of having a little bit of influence over the person and eventually getting them to maybe change the behavior that's going on. That behavior might be stopping doing something that's very negative, or it might be getting them to agree to go get treatment. So it's a kind of a 5-step process that involves active listening, rapport building, empathy, leading to influence over the person, to ultimately, hopefully, leading to some behavior change that is more positive for that person in that crisis.
Yes, and I really like that what Tony said earlier was it's not a checkbox that you check off, because you don't just go through empathy once and then going on to the next thing, right? Because then it's unauthentic. Right. And you were saying one thing that really hit me was sincerity is more important than doing it right.
Correct. A lot of times people get nervous about, I don't know the right thing to say, or what if I say the wrong thing? And in all honesty, if you're there, if you're actively listening to the person, and if you show a little bit of empathy, you could say the wrong thing, or you could say it not in the perfect way, but the person reads in you that sense of caring, and that's going to be way more important than saying the technical right term or doing the model perfectly. So sincerity is key.
So Tony, with your background, I'm just curious, does all law enforcement go through the training for mental illness as well, so they can know how to spot between regular folks and those who have special
Yeah. So all officers get some level of crisis intervention training. It starts at the police academy and it continues throughout their career. Not all officers get what's called crisis intervention training, which is more advanced. That's usually a percentage of officers in most departments. Some departments have gone to training all the officers. But what's important is the officers need to want to be doing this, right? They need to be open to it. And officers, just like anybody else, are human beings. Sometimes we're having better days than others. And sometimes we don't have the patience that particular day maybe to listen as much as we would other days. But they all get some basic level of it. And a fair portion of them have the advanced, the crisis intervention training, or even more advanced skills that are the ones that hopefully are getting called on the more serious scenarios, like someone who's threatening to jump off a bridge or someone who's being violent. Hopefully it's the more trained officers that respond to those.
So what's the difference, or is there a difference between calling 911 and a special number for those who are experienced in mental illness?
So 911 is anytime there's a danger to the person or to someone else. That's what 911 is for. If there's no immediate danger of the person hurting themselves or hurting somebody else, we want to reduce stigma, and sending police to deal with folks with mental illness does not help reduce stigma. They may be appropriate, but it's not necessarily the go-to. So if there is no threat of violence to the person or themselves, then the call center number that Mikkel gave or your foundation are going to be a safer way of interacting with that person, keeping it at a lower level, and then a determination can be made if police need to respond by those clinicians or by that emergency response team.
Yeah, and you were talking about stigma, so going back to what Mikkel said earlier about stigma versus awareness. So to give an example of if you're at a park and you see somebody acting weird or different at the park, why is it that somebody is, if a regular person at the park acting weird, and do you know if they're a danger to the others or to themselves, or they're just like that? And is it necessary to call somebody? What would you say for that?
Well, the awareness part is we're hoping our training would help people understand mental health symptoms, and that and reduce the stigma. That the example of the scenario we played earlier is somebody who experienced symptoms of autism being at the park, and how other parents are not, would like the person to leave the park. And for the question or the statement we pose is that, why is somebody with a medical condition, i.e. diabetes, might be allowed to be in the park when they're just in the park minding their own business, not doing anything dangerous to themselves and others, versus somebody who has autism in the park and doing the same thing, minding their own business, doing their own thing, and just enjoying certain activities that's not involving a risk to self or others. So we want to bring up that scenario in terms of awareness that we want the community to understand more about different diagnoses, also to be able to get help, professional help, or to be able to provide resources for the individual, instead of saying that, oh, somebody has mental health and they shouldn't be around here. So that's bringing awareness to the community so that we can support each other.
Yeah. And we're talking about having that extra support and reaching out to that support. Why is it so important? The difference between asking, are you planning on harming yourself or hurting yourself, versus are you planning on killing yourself? If you're talking to somebody that's going through depression, why are those two phrases different, and why they're important?
So the difference is that when somebody is suicidal, they may be experiencing pain and thus suffering. And so for them, ending their life would not be hurting themselves, but that would be ending the pain and the hurt or the bad feelings that they have inside. So that's why we are recommending, officers as well as anybody who asks the question of, are you planning to hurt yourself? Instead of asking that question, we ask, are you planning to kill yourself? Are you planning to end your life? So that we can understand better their plan and their intention, so that we can reach out for help and get the resources to help them. Because again, like I said, if we ask somebody who's depressed, suicidal, who's in severe internal pain, they would say, yeah, no, I'm not hurting myself, because they're already hurt, so I'm not hurting myself. I am, internally they would not say it, but in their head they would say, yeah, I don't want to hurt myself but I want to kill myself. But they might not tell you that if you don't ask the direct question, because ending their life is a way to stop that pain and prevent themselves or stop themselves from getting hurt any longer.
Yeah,
So
and a lot of
that's the
people
difference.
have the misconception that if you're asking them if they plan on killing themselves, then you're putting the ideas in their head, and that's not true, correct? Yeah. And Tony earlier was talking about one of the examples that we were given was a young man at the park that's having autism, and he's just going through his routine, and routine is so important for somebody that's having autism. So for somebody else that don't know the different signs of illnesses or different situations, and they call the cops, what would they say, like if there's an issue like that?
Right. So the first thing we'd say is ask the question, is there a need for police to respond, right? Police respond to enforce the law, to keep the safety and security. So someone making you uncomfortable might not necessarily rise to the level of calling the police. You're just uncomfortable about them. But let's say you believe that there's more going on. You don't know why this person's doing what they're doing. What the police are going to ask you is to convey what behavior, what things the person has said, what is it that's making you feel uncomfortable. And why that's important is if what you describe as someone who could potentially be violent or someone who's maybe stalking children or something, that response is going to be a lot faster than if it's someone that you can't really put your finger on why they're making you uncomfortable. Maybe in this scenario that we used before, the video, it was someone with autism, but the people didn't recognize it was someone with autism, so they were a little uncomfortable about the movements and behaviors of that person. So those two responses can be very different in time, and we don't want to have them responding with lights and siren to someone who has autism who might become more triggered by that response. But we do want them to respond to someone who's maybe stalking, looking, potentially going to try to kidnap a child that way. So we want to make sure we give them the right information. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't highlight autism is not a mental health condition, it's a neurological condition. However, the behaviors, sometimes people don't recognize what they are, and they can't tell that it's autism, that it's not traumatic brain injury, or something else. And the techniques to talk to someone who is maybe having an episode or a little bit of a meltdown with autism are very similar to dealing with someone in crisis. So that's why we use both examples or both type of things, but it's more of it's a neurological condition versus a mental health condition.
Can you give a little bit more background as far as what happens after the police comes? Because especially for the Asian communities, or in general, those who has a stigma of, oh, I'm afraid to call because my family's gonna get in trouble, or I'm afraid to call because they're gonna lock them up or they're gonna go to jail. Right. So what happens after? So
there's not a one size fits all, right? Because you could have someone who has mental health issues or has some other drug influence issues who needs treatment, but they may also have an arrest warrant out for previous behavior. So I can't tell you that they're never going to be arrested. Just like in 99.9% of the cases, most local police departments are not so much involved in someone's legal or residency status. They're involved with whatever the crisis is right now. But let's limit it to someone who's exhibiting signs of mental health. The police are going to come out if they're called, and they're going to assess them for whether or not they are a danger to self, danger to other, or gravely disabled. If any of those conditions are met and they can't be out there in the community by themselves, they're going to want to take them to the nearest psychiatric facility that can evaluate them and make a better determination of what is required for their treatment. That doesn't involve going to jail. It unfortunately sometimes looks like they're being arrested because they are often transported in a police car in handcuffs by policy, but they're not being arrested. They're not being taken to a detention center or anything else. If it is strictly a mental health issue, they're being taken to the hospital, the nearest licensed hospital to treat with psychiatric conditions. And the people who called and reported it, their police officers are not really going to be asking anything about their status or any legal conditions or anything like that. That's not the focus. That is the focus. The focus is on the person in crisis.
Okay, great. So if for those who want more information, how can they reach out to you?
Michelle gave the call line number. That's probably the best to reach out for generic questions, and from there they can kind of direct them to us or to whoever they need to direct them to.
Great, thank you. And if you want to reach out to us, you can find us at SSK for StrongSmartandKindFoundation.org, or our email is StrongSmartandKind@gmail.com. Thank you, everybody.